There's a city under the Amazon, a ghost of one. It's not the empty wilderness we think of. This place, under the canopy, it was full of people, millions of them. Long before any Europeans arrived, and the ruins there, the biggest ones, they aren't made of stone, they're made of earth, they're made of memory. So the question is, how does something that big, a civilization of that scale, just vanish? Vanish so completely we thought it was never there at all. And finding it again, what does that do? It changes the story, the whole history of the Americas. It's a chapter we're just starting to read. The story of an empty wilderness was a powerful one, and for centuries, that was the only story we told. Explorers wrote home about a green ocean, a trackless expanse. A place where civilization, as they defined it, couldn't take root. Even well into the 20th century, many anthropologists saw the Amazon as a kind of pristine museum. Small nomadic tribes living in a perfect, untouched balance with nature. People who passed through the forest without leaving a mark. That view was so dominant it even got a name from historians: ecological imperialism. It was this unspoken assumption that only Europeans had the power and the right to truly shape a continent, to build upon it. Everyone else, the story went, just lived lightly upon the land. And in the Amazon, that story felt true because the evidence was so hard to see. If you walked through that dense jungle, you wouldn't find great stone pyramids or marble temples. The jungle doesn't preserve those clues. Vines and roots and relentless rain dismantle stone in centuries, so when early researchers looked, they saw only wilderness. They accepted a narrative of emptiness because the proof of something else was hidden in plain sight, woven into the very soil beneath their feet. This misconception wasn't just academic. It shaped everything: government policies, global perceptions of what the Amazon was and what it could be. It told us a place with millions of people was impossible. But every good story has a twist, and the tools to see the unseen were on their way. The proof was always there. We just had to learn how to look. For a long time, the real scale of the Amazon's past was hidden. It was under this green veil, so thick it seemed impossible to see through. Then there was a change, a quiet revolution in how we see the world, a technology that gave us a kind of X-ray vision from the sky. It's called LIDAR, light detection and ranging. Here's how it works. A plane flies over the canopy, a specially equipped aircraft, and from its belly, it sends down millions of laser pulses. Every second, these pulses are like tiny fingers. They slip through gaps in the leaves, they touch the ground, and they bounce back to a sensor. By timing each journey, a computer can build a map. A precise, three-dimensional map of the forest floor. It digitally strips away every tree, and what was left when researchers first saw this data wasn't empty. It was a blueprint, a ghostly, intricate blueprint of a lost world. Suddenly, the empty wilderness on the screen vanished, and in its place were shapes. Geometric shapes, perfect circles and squares and octagons, carved right into the earth. There were long, straight causeways raised above the wetlands. Connecting distant points like ancient highways, there were vast mounds, platforms, reservoirs, all arranged with clear intention. It was the skeleton of a civilization. Revealed not by one dramatic find, but by millions of data points. Archaeologists like Dr. Heiko Prumers, he led surveys in Bolivia. He described watching these images form as surreal. One moment, just the uniform green of the canopy on the monitor. The next, a sprawling urban network starts to emerge from the digital fog, a phantom city rising from the data. And this wasn't a handful of villages. LIDAR mapping has now covered hundreds of square kilometers, and everywhere it looks, it finds the same story. Written into the landscape, the evidence became overwhelming. The Amazon wasn't a pristine natural garden. It was, for centuries, a profoundly anthropogenic environment. That means it was deeply shaped by human hands. The forest itself, in many places, is a living artifact, a garden planted and managed by generations. People who knew how to build with earth, not against it. So if this wasn't a wilderness, what kind of world did they actually build? The first sign came from the ground. In Acre, in western Brazil, modern deforestation in the 70s started to uncover something old. Workers were clearing land, and these shapes began to appear. On the ground, they just looked like shallow ditches, low walls of dirt, but from the air you could see it. They were perfect geometric shapes, huge circles. Exact squares, complicated octagons. Some of these earthworks were over 300 meters across. They weren't mounds built up, they were dug out. Carved right into the soil, archaeologists call them geoglyphs, and the precision is striking. For a long time, nobody understood them. Were they forts? The ditches seemed too shallow. Were they villages? The insides were mostly empty. The main theory now, from researchers like Martti Persinen, is that they were ceremonial centers. Places of deep social and spiritual meaning. Picture a population spread out across a huge, green landscape. These geometric clearings were where they gathered. A place to come together for rituals, for trade, for community decisions. Their scale means they were built to hold a lot of people, and the geometry is the real clue. Making a perfect circle or a square with straight sides over an area that large that requires advanced planning. It means a shared knowledge, a common understanding of measurement, maybe even astronomy. These forms are only fully visible from above, which raises a question. Who were they built for? The answer might be for the people on the ground, and for the forces they believed were watching from above. The Acre geoglyphs are a quiet, monumental statement. They tell us that long before chainsaws, this land wasn't wild. It was managed, it was designed. Someone was thinking on a grand scale, organizing labor, imprinting their worldview onto the earth in a language of geometry. This was the first solid evidence that the old story of small, nomadic tribes was incomplete. But these ceremonial centers were just the start. They were the opening sentence of a much longer story, one that pointed north toward something even more surprising, waiting under the forest canopy. Those patterns in the earth, though, they were just the start. The real story of this hidden civilization is further south, in Bolivia, in these huge seasonally flooded grasslands, the Llanos de Mojos. And here's where you find the builders, a people called the Casarabe culture. They weren't just visiting, they weren't just there for ceremonies, they settled in long-term from about 500 to 1400 AD. And what they built, it really challenges what we think a city is. We imagine stone, crowded streets, a dense center. The Casarabe did something else. They practiced what's called landscape urbanism. They didn't build a city on the land, they built the land into a city. It's like instead of building one big castle, they re-engineered a whole kingdom. Their tools were earth and water. They built these massive, straight causeways raised high above the wet savanna, sometimes running for dozens of kilometers. And these weren't just paths, they were elevated highways connecting a network of monumental centers. They dug these intricate, zigzagging canals. The canals moved people and goods, but they also worked as sophisticated fish farms, a reliable protein source. And then, most ingeniously, they built these vast complexes of raised fields. Think of big, rectangular platforms of earth lifted above the annual floods. On these artificial islands, they grew their crops: maize, squash, manioc, safe from the water all around them. That turned a challenging, flooded landscape into a breadbasket. Archaeologist Carla James Betancourt calls this system a garden city. It was a metropolis without a downtown, a dispersed, green urban network where ceremonial centers, houses, farmland, and waterways were all woven into one living system. Life here wasn't separate from nature, It was integrated. The forest, the wetlands, the canals, they were all part of the city's architecture. This was a deep adaptation. A testament to innovation facing real ecological challenges. The Casarabe didn't fight their environment. They listened to it. They understood its rhythms, the flood, the dry, and they designed a civilization that worked with those rhythms, not against them. And it worked brilliantly for nearly 1,000 years. This was a sustainable, thriving world. But if it was that successful, that ingeniously designed, then the next question just comes up. What happened to it? How does a garden city built to last just fade back into the earth? The Casarabe built in a way that moved with the land, but in another part of the Amazon, a society took a different approach. They imposed their order on it. A few years back, in the foothills of the Ecuadorian Andes, there was a discovery in the Upano Valley. LIDAR revealed something there. It didn't look like a garden city. It looked more like a modern metropolis just lost in time. The data showed over 6,000 platforms, rectangular earthen platforms. Each one was a foundation for a home or for a communal building, and they weren't scattered. They were in tight clusters like distinct neighborhoods, all connected by this network of roads, perfectly straight roads. They ran for dozens of kilometers in some cases, cutting through the terrain with this determined, almost modern sense of planning. These roads connected the residential clusters to wide ceremonial plazas and to what looked like carefully managed agricultural zones. It was a complete, integrated urban landscape. A city with suburbs and downtowns and highways, all built from earth and hidden under the jungle for about 1,500 years. For the lead archaeologist Stefan Rostein, he'd worked in that valley for decades, finding pottery, small mounds. Seeing the full LIDAR map was a moment of profound clarity. He called it a complete revolution because the scale of coordination it implies is staggering. To plan and build straight roads that long, to organize the labor for thousands of platforms. That required a society with a strong, centralized vision. It required leaders, engineers, a population working together toward a common architectural goal. This wasn't just a big village, it was a connected regional system, likely supporting a population in the tens of thousands, perhaps even more, and that's the real importance of the Upano Valley. For a long time, the great stories of complex urban life in the ancient Americas were set in the stone cities of the Andes, like Machu Picchu, or in the vast metropolises of Mesoamerica, like Teotihuacan. The Amazon was always the supporting character, the green backdrop. The Upano discovery shatters that hierarchy. It tells us that here, in the heart of the rainforest, societies were reaching a scale, a level of social organization that rivaled the more famous civilizations to the north and south. They were doing it on their own terms, with their own materials, but the ambition was the same. So we have two different models now. The Casarabe's dispersed, integrated garden cities in Bolivia, and the Upano's dense, planned urban network in Ecuador. Both reveal societies of immense sophistication. But this new understanding of their scale leads to an even bigger question. A more difficult one. If millions of people truly lived here, shaping the forest so profoundly, where did they all go, feeding millions? It takes more than roads and layouts. It takes soil, and the Amazon, that was the real challenge. Under all that green, the natural soil is thin, it's poor, the rains come and wash the nutrients away. For a long time, that was another reason people said large settlements couldn't work here. How do you farm on that scale with ground that fragile? The answer was in the dirt. A special kind of dirt. In some parts of the forest you dig and you find soil that's black, deep black. It feels different, darker, richer, incredibly fertile. They call it Terra Preta, Amazonian dark earth, and that's not natural, that's an invention, an ancient technology made by human hands. Think of a farmer centuries back. They're not just taking from the land, they're building it. They take charcoal from fires, broken pottery, food scraps, fish bones, manure, mix it into the ground. This wasn't just dumping, it was deliberate, managed. Over generations, that practice turned the thin red earth into something deep and black, a living sponge. A super soil. What's remarkable is Terra Preta doesn't just get used up, it regenerates. The charcoal, the biochar, it acts like a microscopic coral reef. Full of tiny pores, it traps nutrients and water, gives a home to microbes and fungi. That creates a self-sustaining cycle, fertility that can last thousands of years. Soil scientists like Bruno Glaser, they've studied this. It's not just compost, it's a sophisticated, engineered system. The charcoal locks carbon into the ground for centuries. The pottery shards help aerate the soil, hold moisture. These widespread patches of terra preta, they're more than garden plots. They're the literal groundwork of a hidden metropolis. Proof of long-term, intensive care. These societies didn't just live in the Amazon, they built it, layer by layer, meal by meal. They took a challenging environment and turned it into a breadbasket. Not by conquering nature, but by collaborating with it, by understanding the deep chemistry of life in the soil. This black earth is their legacy, still feeding plants and people today. But a transformation that profound of the landscape, it leads to a deeper mystery. If they were that successful, that deeply rooted in a place they built from the ground up, what force could have undone their world? It took more than just hands to build a civilization from earth and charcoal. It took a vision, a way to organize thousands of people across a territory the size of a small country. So the social blueprint that held it together, we might be looking for a king in the wrong places. In other ancient ruins, you see power in palaces, in lavish tombs, statues of rulers. In the Amazon, those markers of a single, supreme leader aren't there. No vast royal compounds, no treasure-filled tombs for a pharaoh. That suggests something different. A society where power didn't flow from one throne, but from many sources. Anthropologists point to a model called a heterarchy. Think of it not as a pyramid with one person at the top, but as a web. A network of connected centers, each with its own local leaders, its own ceremonial heart. These centers, linked by those long, straight causeways, would have cooperated. They shared resources, shared knowledge, shared labor for big projects. And leadership here might have been demonstrated, not just inherited. A person gained influence by organizing a successful feast, by managing trade in exotic feathers or stones, by orchestrating the construction of a new canal that helped several communities. Power was tied to responsibility, to the ability to bring people together and get things done for the collective good. The social glue was likely kinship and deep reciprocity. In a garden city, your family's raised field was next to your neighbor's. You shared water from the same canal. Your survival was intertwined. So building a monumental earthwork wasn't the command of a distant ruler. It was a communal project, a ritual act that strengthened social bonds. It was an event. Imagine the gathering, hundreds, maybe thousands, coming together from across the region at a designated time, maybe following celestial cycles. They would dig, move earth, share food, renew alliances, celebrate. The act of building was the society expressing itself. The finished geoglyph or platform was less a monument to a person and more a monument to the community itself, a permanent reminder of what they could achieve together. This model explains the scale and the sustainability. A single, rigid state can collapse if its capital falls, but a resilient network where knowledge and authority are distributed can adapt. If one center faced hardship, others could support it. This social blueprint allowed for managing a dispersed population across a vast area, maintaining order and cohesion without the heavy hand of a centralized bureaucracy. It was a sophisticated, uniquely Amazonian answer to complexity, but even the most resilient web can be tested, and the greatest tests often come not from within, but from outside the forest's edge. A society isn't just its big roads and central places. It's also the home where daily life happens, and in the Bolivian Amazon, LIDAR showed that, the ancient neighborhood plan. A specific design called the Ring Ditch Village. Think of a bullseye, at the center a raised mound of earth, a dry plaza, a communal heart. Around it you have these wide, shallow ditches, one after another, and the ground between the ditches is built up into raised rings. Those rings were the neighborhoods where extended families built their homes. Up above the seasonal floods, the ditches themselves did many things. First, they were smart water management. In the wet season, they channeled water away, making each village a dry island in a temporary sea. They might have also been subtle boundaries, not so much for defense but to define a shared space, a line between the community and the wider world. And practically, they could have been productive, places to grow plants or maybe even raise fish. John Walker's work around the Archaeology River shows these weren't random. They were planned residential hubs. Each ring village was like a cell in a larger body, connected to the others and to the bigger ceremonial centers by those long, straight causeways. You can see the rhythm. In the dry season, people moved out, tending distant fields, traveling the causeways to trade or gather for ceremonies. But when the rains came and the savanna became a lake, these villages turned into self-sufficient islands. The community drew inward, living on the raised rings, gathering in the central plaza, living on stored food and what the ditches provided. This layout shows a deep understanding of the environment. It wasn't just about surviving the flood, it was about designing a life that worked with the cycle. The Ring Ditch Village mixed pure practicality with a strong sense of place. Every family lived in a circle around a common center, inside a larger circle of community, all within the big, engineered circle of their civilization. This was how millions structured their daily life, not in a crowded city, but in a network of intentional, resilient homes, but a design this perfect, this tuned to the land. It makes the silence that followed even harder to understand. What could disrupt a harmony that was built to last? The old idea of slash and burn, that simple story, it just doesn't hold up. That was one small technique, just a single tool. The real system was something else entirely, a masterpiece of engineering, of ecology, this diverse, intensive matrix. A landscape designed to produce food and designed with incredible foresight. In the flooded savannas, they built those raised fields, those vast networks. But on the higher ground, in the upland forests, they worked a different kind of magic. They practiced agroforestry. This wasn't about clearing land for one crop. It was gardening, but gardening on a grand, strategic scale. They cultivated useful trees, the Brazil nut towering, palms for fruit and for fiber. They planted them right alongside their crops. They created food forests, managed orchards that mimicked the jungle's natural layers but curated them, curated for human benefit. In steeper areas, they likely built terraces to stop erosion, to create more space, and they filled those terraces with a polyculture of plants. The result was a mosaic, a patchwork quilt of different food sources spread across the land. A family might have a raised field for manioc, a home garden with herbs, with fruit trees, and then access to a larger communal orchard. This wasn't just about more food. It was about security. If a pest hit one area or a flood, another would thrive. The system was resilient inherently. Botanist Charles Clement points out that this is where dozens of our global staples came from. Where they were first domesticated: manioc, sweet potato, peanuts, cacao, pineapple, chili peppers, all of them came from the careful, patient work of Amazonian farmers. Work over thousands of years. This sophisticated food production was the engine, the quiet, green engine of that hidden metropolis. It supported dense populations not by conquering the environment, but by weaving themselves into it. Weaving in more deeply, They created abundance without degradation, a lesson in sustainable living that modern agriculture is still trying to learn. This was a civilization that saw its home not as a warehouse to be emptied, but as a garden. A garden to be tended, and for centuries that garden flourished, which makes the silence that followed, it makes it not just a historical mystery, it's an ecological one too. What could make a system that resilient, that intertwined, what could make it finally come undone? Those causeways, the ones you can still see from above, they were made of earth. Built up high, sometimes a meter tall, stretching for dozens of kilometers, they crossed the savannas, the ones that flooded every year. In the dry months, they were roads. But when the rains came and the plains turned into a shallow sea, they became the only dry paths, elevated highways. You'd travel by canoe from your village, a ring of ditches. You'd paddle up to the base of this massive earthen berm, pull your canoe out of the water, and then walk. You'd walk along this perfectly straight ridge high above everything. You could see for miles. It connected you. This was about more than travel. It bound a scattered population together. It let people move. It let goods move, exotic feathers, polished stones, special ceramics. News could travel. Leaders from different centers could meet. It made a vast territory feel like one place. And alongside these causeways, sometimes cutting their own paths, were the canals. They weren't random, they were carefully dug, often just as straight. They had two purposes. First, they were transportation. Aquatic highways for canoes, moving heavy loads of crops or stone, much easier than over land. But second, they were managed systems. By controlling the water flow, these engineers created ideal habitats for fish, for aquatic life. They were farming the water. In some areas it went further. They built fish weirs, structures of stone or wood placed in streams or at canal mouths. They acted like gentle fences, funnels, channeling fish during their migrations into holding areas, into traps. It was a way to harvest protein, reliable, sustainable. You weren't just taking from a wild stock. You were guiding it, managing it as a resource. A community with a maintained weir had a guaranteed food source, year after year. This whole network, the causeways, the canals, the weirs, it shows a society that thought regionally. They didn't see the annual flood as a catastrophe. They saw it as a rhythm, something to orchestrate. The water wasn't a threat, it was a resource, the medium their civilization moved through. They mastered the hydrology of a difficult place, turned its biggest challenge into its most powerful tool. This infrastructure was their social web made physical. It's how a heterarchy of cities and villages functioned as one. It moved food from raised fields to distant neighborhoods. It let someone living in one river basin feel connected to a ceremonial center 50 kilometers away. It was their circulatory system, and it proves they weren't just living in the landscape, they were conducting it. They were the engineers of a living, water-based world. But even brilliant engineering needs constant care. It needs generations of knowledge passed down to maintain the canals, to clear the causeways, and if that thread of knowledge is cut, the system doesn't collapse all at once. It just slowly forgets how to work. A garden needs protection, and in the Tapajós River basin, the story changes. The evidence points to a different kind of power. Not just building, but defending. Archaeologists found massive, fortified settlements. These weren't the open geoglyphs from Acre or the spread-out garden cities. These were strongholds, a community center, but surrounded by deep ditches, tall wooden walls. These defenses enclosed huge spaces, some up to 50 hectares. Dozens of football fields. Inside, the ground is covered with residential mounds, thousands of them, dense clusters of homes all inside the walls, sites linked to the Santarém culture. They weren't just large villages, they were regional hubs, tens of thousands of people. The scale of the fortifications is a statement. By this period, maybe 1,000 years ago, the rules were changing. Populations had grown, resources became more valuable. The fortifications suggest increased competition, conflict between rival centers, vying for control over trade routes or the best farmland along the riverbanks. Archaeologist Marcio Amaral's work shows these hubs likely controlled access to luxury goods, exquisitely painted pottery, ornaments made from rare green stone. Having these things wasn't just about wealth, it was about status, spiritual authority. Controlling their trade meant wielding influence. This adds a layer of political complexity. The history here wasn't unchanging, peaceful harmony. It was dynamic, periods of cooperation like the Causeways, and periods of tension, alliance, likely organized conflict. The walls tell us these societies were navigating the challenges of success, managing larger populations, defining territories, protecting what they'd built. It shows a world in motion, adapting not just to the environment but to each other. This wasn't a fall from grace. It was a sign of a mature civilization dealing with human realities. Growth and ambition, and if these centers were so powerful, so well defended, it makes their silence later even more profound. What force could overcome walls built to withstand any rival? The walls speak of connection too, not just conflict. The Amazon wasn't a closed world. Its rivers weren't barriers, they were highways, and along these liquid roads moved goods and ideas, tying a continent together. A metropolis of that scale needed vast trade networks to sustain it. Think of a canoe carved from a single tree moving down the Madeira River. Its hull is full. Polished stone axes from the highlands, bundles of bright macaw feathers, blocks of salt evaporated from springs, and maybe most precious, small wrapped packets of cacao. That canoe is just one vessel. The river was a prehistoric superhighway, a corridor linking the Amazon basin to the distant Andes and through tributaries all the way to the Atlantic coast. The proof is in the artifacts found far from home. Archaeologists in the Bolivian lowlands have found tools made from obsidian. The nearest source for that obsidian is in the Andes. Over 1,000 kilometers away, in highland tombs in Peru, they find headdresses with the feathers of Amazonian parrots, birds that couldn't survive in the cold mountain air. Resins, medicinal plants, exotic hardwoods, all moved across incredible distances. This wasn't occasional barter. It was a systematic, long-distance exchange system. Anthropologist Anna Roosevelt argues that seeing the Amazon as an isolated wilderness is a mistake. She sees it as the connected heart of a hemisphere. Its rivers were the arteries, its major settlements, the garden cities and fortified hubs, were the beating hearts, nodes where goods were traded, processed, and sent onward. This exchange was about more than objects. A stone axe from the mountains brought the technology of its making. The seeds of a new crop variety, traded along a river, could revolutionize agriculture somewhere new. Stories traveled with the traders, beliefs, artistic styles. The genetic evidence suggests people moved, too, marrying between regions, creating a mosaic of connections. The Amazon was a great continental melting pot, where innovations from the highlands met the deep ecological knowledge of the lowlands and created something new. This constant flow contributed directly to the cultural richness of the pre-Columbian world. The sophistication of the Andes and the ingenuity of the Amazon weren't separate stories. They were chapters in the same book, written by people in constant conversation across 1,000 miles of forest and river. But if this hub was so connected, so vital to a continental network, its sudden silence would have sent shockwaves far beyond the jungle's edge. The end of trade is a symptom of a deeper collapse. These earthworks, their purpose, it wasn't just practical. The shapes meant something, the circles, the octagon. They weren't only spaces, they were symbols. For the people building them, the world was alive with spirits, with ancestors. Their mythology was a map of that living world. So reshaping the earth, it wasn't just engineering. It was inscribing belief onto it, making the invisible visible. archaeologists looking at these sites, they've noticed something. Many of the geoglyphs align with the sun's path. Their openings point to the solstices, those moments when the sun seems to stand still. That wasn't an accident. It was a calendar, a way to mark time, to know when to plant, when to gather, when to hold the key ceremonies. The earth itself became a clock, tracking the journey of a celestial being across the sky. Other shapes, they seem to represent the powerful animals of their world, the anaconda especially. In many Amazonian cosmologies, the anaconda isn't just a snake. It's a creator being, a force that shaped the rivers and the land. You look at the long causeways cutting across the savanna, the winding canals. From above, they don't look like straight lines. They flow, they curve with intention. They are the body of the anaconda, etched into the earth. To travel on that causeway was to walk along the spine of a god. To dig that canal was to trace its path. That changes the understanding completely. Building a road wasn't a public works project, it was a religious act. A ritual of creation repeated by each generation. Maintaining it was a sacred duty, a way to honor the being that gave them the river, that gave them life. The leading thinker on this, Clark Erikson, he calls these places built environments, but that's a technical term for something magical. He means the people didn't just live on the land. They turned their entire territory into a sacred map. Every mound, every ditch, every plaza was a dot on that map, a reference point in a story about where they came from and how the world worked. When they gathered in the geometric plaza for a ceremony, they were standing inside a symbol. They were at the center of their own cosmology. This practice did something for the society. It reinforced social bonds, the act of coming together to build, to celebrate in these spaces. It connected them to each other, and it connected them to the ancestors who first laid out the lines. To the spirits in the forest, the river, the sky, so the view has to shift. This wasn't a metropolis in our modern sense, not concrete and commerce. It was a physical expression of a spiritual worldview. The engineering was brilliant, yes, but it was in service of a philosophy. A lived philosophy where culture and nature were not two separate things, they were one inseparable whole. The forest was not a resource to be managed, it was a relative to be respected. The city was not separate from the jungle, it was the jungle thoughtfully conversed with. That changes the scale of the loss. It wasn't just a society that faded, it was an entire way of seeing the world, a sacred map that was slowly folded up and put away. And when the last person who could read that map was gone, the lines remained, waiting in the soil, a silent language we are only now beginning to decipher. The numbers are staggering. LIDAR maps show patterns, but they also show a population, a silent census from the sky. The key is in the mounds, thousands of them. In the Upano Valley, each of those rectangular platforms could be a home, a foundation for a family, and now researchers can do something. They can count them. They can group them into clusters like neighborhoods. Then, with statistical models, they can start to estimate how many people lived here. So you take one cluster, a group of, say, 40 platforms together. If each one held an extended family, that's already hundreds of people in one small area. Then you zoom out. LIDAR shows dozens of clusters, hundreds, all connected by those straight roads. And when you extrapolate that across a whole valley, across a region of garden cities and centers, the math points to something. The estimates suggest regional populations could reach hundreds of thousands, maybe across the whole Amazon at its peak, even millions. It's a quantitative leap. It moves from saying a site is big to understanding a civilization was vast. It gives a numerical backbone to the idea of a hidden metropolis. Scholar Chris Fisher, whose modeled populations in Mesoamerica, offers a caution. These are estimates, models based on assumptions, family size, how many platforms were in use at once, but the foundational fact is there, the sheer number of structures. The physical evidence of occupation is written into the landscape at a density we never imagined. This changes the demographic history of the Americas. For so long, the story was a sparsely populated hemisphere, a virgin land. These models suggest certain Amazon regions had population densities comparable to ancient Old World civilizations. Not a single crammed city, but a sprawling, green urban network. This wasn't a wilderness with a few villages. It was a lived-in, managed, crowded world. A world of millions, and that scale of human life leaves a mark on the earth and on the biological fabric of the forest itself. The lines on the land, that sacred map, people were still reading it. But then, slowly, the reading stopped. That was around 500 years ago. The great earthworks began to quiet. The geometric plazas saw fewer gatherings. The causeways they grew over, the garden cities once buzzing, became quieter. This wasn't a single event, it was a gradual fading, a slow turning down of the volume. The theories point to a combination of pressures, a perfect storm. One major factor was the climate. The period from around 1400 to 1500 AD, that was a time of global climatic upheaval. The Little Ice Age, it brought shifts in rainfall, longer droughts, unpredictable weather. For a civilization built on precise water management, on knowing exactly when the floods would come and go, this was a fundamental threat. Canals could run dry, raised fields might not get enough water. The seasonal rhythm their society was tuned to began to stutter. A few bad years in a row could strain everything. The food web, the trade networks, the social contracts. There may have been internal strains too. As populations grew and resources became scarcer, the cooperative spirit, that heterarchy, could have frayed. The walls in places like the Tapajós suggest conflict was part of their history. In a prolonged crisis, cooperation might have given way to competition. That would weaken the regional networks, their greatest strength. Managing such a complex, engineered landscape required shared knowledge and labor. If social cohesion broke down, the system itself would begin to fail. The canals would silt up, the causeways would erode, the garden would start to forget its gardeners, and this process, this abandonment, it was largely complete before the first European ships ever reached the coast. When Spanish and Portuguese explorers pushed into the continent in the 16th and 17th centuries, they weren't encountering a civilization at its peak. They were walking into the aftermath. The empty wilderness they described, that green ocean, was already a post-apocalyptic landscape, a managed forest, a garden, quietly reclaiming the works of its former stewards. The cities of Earth had already returned to the earth. That timing is important. It challenges a simpler story. The narrative has often been that European diseases alone swept through, decimating populations. And while those illnesses later caused catastrophic loss, the story of the Amazon reveals a deeper history. It shows indigenous societies with their own cycles. Growth, resilience, vulnerability. They faced their own existential challenges, from climate to social strife. Long before any outsider arrived, their decline began from within the system. A testament that no civilization, no matter how ingeniously adapted, is immune to the pressures of a changing world. The Great Abandonment reminds us that history is rarely about a single villain or a single cause. It's a tapestry of intertwined forces, environmental and human, that can slowly unravel even the most enduring threads. And in that unraveling, something else was lost. Not just people, but a library of knowledge written in the trees and the soil. The earthworks aren't the only record. There's another kind of memory. One that's been passed down in story, not in soil. For the indigenous peoples of the Amazon, that great abandonment wasn't the end of their history. It was a chapter. And the next chapters were carried in the voices of elders, in community rituals, in the myths that explain how the world came to be. Archaeologists are now listening to these oral traditions. not as folklore but as a parallel archive, a living record of what came before. Groups like the Arawak and the Tupi-speaking peoples, their ancestors likely built those garden cities. They tell stories of a time when people were far more numerous. They speak of great chiefs in vast settlements, of networks that stretched across the rivers. There's a myth among the Persei people. It tells of a great canoe that saved their ancestors from a world-covering flood. To an outside ear, it sounds like a universal deluge story. But to an anthropologist, someone like Manuela Carneiro da Cunha, it resonates differently. It could be a deep cultural memory, a memory of the real, catastrophic climatic shifts that reshaped the Amazon centuries ago. The unpredictable rains, the rising waters that may have finally overwhelmed even the most ingenious canals and raised fields. These stories aren't mere legends. They're historical narratives carefully encoded, a way of preserving truth across generations when written records don't exist. They carry the trauma of loss and the resilience of survival. Listening to them changes the frame of the entire discovery. The LIDAR maps and the pottery shards, they're not revealing a civilization that was utterly lost. They're providing a scientific corroboration for knowledge that never disappeared. They're validating what indigenous communities have known in their bones and in their stories for generations. That hidden metropolis wasn't hidden to everyone. Its legacy lives on in language, in kinship systems, in the very way people relate to the forest. It lives in the understanding that the trees around a village aren't wild. They're the descendants of orchards planted by ancestors. This perspective is crucial. It reframes the archaeological work from one of discovery to one of reunion. It becomes a conversation between two ways of knowing, the technological vision from the sky meeting the enduring wisdom from the ground. It reminds us that history isn't just something we dig up. It's also something we carry, and in that carrying, the story of the Amazon's past remains alive, waiting for the right questions to bring its full echo into the present. The rivers weren't just highways, they were fields, living fields. To see that, you have to look under the water. There's a new archaeology now. It's not in the jungle. It's in the riverbeds. These submerged landscapes are starting to talk. When someone like Dolores Pipano looks at these river sites, the preservation is different. On land, wood rots, things fall apart, but underwater, in that silt where there's no oxygen, organic material can last for centuries. Picture a team underwater, mapping the river bottom. Their hands clear the sediment and they find a line of stakes, wooden stakes driven in deep centuries ago. This isn't random. It's a fish weir, a structure to funnel fish to make the harvest predictable. Easy, even, it's a snapshot of management, active river management, and nearby they might find broken ceramics, a whole cache of them. This isn't trash. It's a deposit, a deliberate one. Maybe it marked a safe channel through a difficult stretch, or maybe it was an offering, a gift to the river's spirit. These sites are time capsules. They hold things we almost never see on land, seeds from the plants they were growing, tools made of wood and fiber, showing the craft of daily life. There's environmental DNA too. It can tell us the fish they were raising, the plants on the banks. This new field fills a gap. We've seen the causeways from above. The canals, now we're seeing the tools from within the water, the tactics. It shows they didn't just live beside the rivers, they worked inside them. They made the flowing water a resource, a managed one. The rivers weren't just routes, they were engineered ecosystems, sacred spaces where the practical need for food met a spiritual relationship with the water. Every fish trap was a technology, and it was a kind of prayer, an acknowledgement of a gift from the river, a way to make sure that gift kept coming. This underwater evidence completes the picture. It was an integrated world, a metropolis where land and water weren't separate. They were one continuous home, a cultivated home, and if the rivers were that central, it makes you wonder. What other secrets does the water hold, still waiting in the dark to be read? We thought saving the forest meant protecting a wilderness untouched by humans. That idea has guided Amazon conservation for more than 100 years. The vision was a pristine place, a kind of natural museum, but that idea is a myth. It's a European myth. Explorers saw a landscape they didn't understand and called it empty. They called it virgin. We know now it was a garden, a managed garden. A humanized one. This isn't just a historical point. It changes how we think about protecting the planet today. A lot of the biodiversity we're trying to save didn't come from untouched nature. It came from human care. The rich Terra Preta soils were made by people. The Brazil nut trees, the fruit palms in certain areas, that's not random. That's the result of thousands of years of planting, of tending, of dispersal by indigenous farmers. Carolina Levis is a conservation biologist who studies this. Her work shows the tree species that dominate the Amazon today are the ones most useful to pre-Columbian societies. The forest remembers where people lived. What we call wild forests are often ancient orchards, abandoned but planted. That doesn't make the forest less precious. It makes its value deeper. It's a cultural landscape, a living monument to a partnership between people and place that lasted for millennia. This flips the conservation script. Seeing indigenous communities as intruders in a pristine wilderness isn't just wrong. It's backwards. They aren't newcomers threatening a natural balance. They are the descendants of the gardeners who created that balance. Their traditional knowledge of fire, of planting, of seasons isn't primitive. It's sophisticated ecological science refined over centuries. Modern deforestation is different. It's industrial logging and agriculture. It's a sudden rupture. It strips away that deep history in a season. It's nothing like the long-term interaction that shaped the forest's richness. So the most effective path for conservation isn't to fence people out. It's to partner with the people who never left, to recognize their land rights and their historical role as stewards. The studies are consistent. The best protected areas of the Amazon are indigenous territories. These communities aren't passive. They are active defenders. They use inherited knowledge to manage the ecosystem. They are the living link to the practices that built the hidden metropolis. Partnering with them means learning from them. It means supporting their governance, seeing them as essential allies. The lesson from the lost cities is one of hope. It proves humans don't have to be a destructive force. For over 1,000 years, societies in the Amazon thrived at a scale of millions. They enriched the soil, they increased biodiversity, they engineered a landscape that supported life in breathtaking abundance. They were a force for natural flourishing. That's the vital insight for our future. The challenge isn't to disappear from nature. It's to learn how to be present within it, like the Amazon's first gardeners were. To build our world not as a separate thing, but as a careful conversation with the living systems that sustain us. The silent, overgrown ruins aren't just a relic. They are a blueprint for a different kind of future. The story is also about what they believed. So we go to the western edge of the Amazon, to a place in Peru called Montegrande. The earth rises differently there. It's not a ring of ditches, not a plaza. It's a massive ceremonial mound, a temple complex built over 1,000 years, layer after layer. Its architecture whispers a connection. A spiral ramp coils around the central mound. That design echoes the sacred snail, a symbol of life and cycles found in both Amazonian and Andean cosmology. This was more than a local shrine. Montegrande was a religious hub, a destination. People traveled from across the region, following rivers and trails to gather there. They came for pilgrimage, for rituals that tied their scattered communities to a common spiritual center. Archaeologist Quirino Oliveira's work shows a place of profound importance. Excavations found burials inside the mound with offerings that speak of far-reaching trade. polished stone mirrors, exotic shells from the Pacific, vibrant pigments. These weren't just grave goods, they were statements of connection, a statement of a person's place in a vast, interconnected world. The location itself is a clue. Montegrande sits at the crossroads between the Amazon rainforest and the Andean highlands. It embodies a fusion. It shows these people weren't isolated. Their spiritual ideas flowed along the same routes as their trade goods, blending with influences from the mountains to create something uniquely powerful. This centralized ceremonial life was the social glue for a dispersed civilization. In a world of garden cities and ring villages spread over thousands of square kilometers, shared faith was a unifying force. Gathering at a place like Montegrande, participating in the same rituals, seeing the same spiral ramp ascend toward the sky, these experiences reinforced a shared identity. They reminded everyone, no matter how far apart their homes were, that they belonged to the same story. The sophistication wasn't just in engineering soil or water. It was in engineering meaning, in creating spaces of such profound symbolic power that they could hold 1 million people together in a common imagination. That spiritual cohesion was the invisible architecture holding up the entire metropolis. It was the reason why, for centuries, people would travel for weeks to add another layer to the mound, to renew the pact between their community and the cosmos. And when that center could no longer hold, when the pilgrimages slowed and the rituals faded, it wasn't just a temple that was abandoned. It was the heart of a world slowly growing quiet. That blueprint for the future is in a race against time now. The LIDAR maps show a ghostly metropolis, but on the ground what you see is immediate danger. Think about a team of archaeologists. They finish a digital survey of a new site. They see the perfect geometry of an ancient plaza, the lines of a causeway, all under the canopy. Then the next year they check a satellite image of the same place, and the green is gone, replaced by the scars of illegal logging roads or the lifeless pits from gold mining. Earthworks that stood for 1,000 years, a bulldozer can erase them in an afternoon. That's the reality of archaeology in the Amazon now. It's a race to document a world that's vanishing. The threats are all connected. Industrial agriculture clears land for soy and cattle, and it plows under the raised fields and the mounds. Illegal miners, the garimperos, they use high-pressure hoses. They blast away riverbanks and forest soil, and they destroy entire archaeological layers looking for gold. And then there's looting, the illegal artifact trade. When someone digs up a ceramic urn to sell, they aren't just taking an object. They're destroying the context, that urn's precise location, what was buried with it, the soil around it. That context is the data. It's the story of who used it and when and why. Once that's gone, the artifact is just a beautiful mystery. Its voice is silenced. Archaeologists like Eduardo Neves, they describe this work as emergency medicine. Their teams are often the first to see a site intact, and the last. They work in tough conditions. They document everything with meticulous care: photographs, GPS points, soil samples, knowing it could be gone in months. And they rarely work alone now. More and more, they partner with indigenous communities. These communities have become the forest's most determined guardians. They patrol their territories, often at great personal risk, to confront loggers and miners. For them, this isn't just about archaeology. It's about defending their home. Their ancestral home and the story of the hidden metropolis. That's a powerful weapon for that defense. When a community can show their ancestors built and managed this landscape for millennia, it changes their legal standing. It changes the moral standing. It shifts the narrative. It goes from outsiders seeing an empty forest ready for exploitation to the world recognizing a living cultural landscape. One with deep historical roots. This evidence strengthens land claims. It bolsters the argument for indigenous stewardship. It proves the best protectors of the Amazon's biodiversity are the people whose history is written into the soil. So preserving these sites isn't a nostalgic look backward. It's a vital step, an urgent step toward a viable future. Every geometric earthwork lost to a bulldozer, that's not just a historical tragedy. It's the erasure of a chapter in the human story, a chapter that holds lessons for resilience, for sustainability, for how to live within our world, not just on it. The fight to save these ruins is, in the deepest sense, a fight to save the wisdom they contain. You can see the whole picture now. The geoglyphs, the garden cities, the Terra Preta soil, the underwater fish weirs, they're not separate mysteries. They fit, they're pieces of one thing, and when you put them together, the old story, the empty wilderness story, it doesn't just crack, it falls apart. What you get instead is a new model for Amazonian history. It rewrites the place. This model throws out the idea of a passive, natural landscape. It gives you what researchers like William Ballet call an anthropogenic Amazon, which means a human-made Amazon, a landscape shaped and managed and enriched by people for over 10,000 years. This wasn't a short episode. It was a deep, long-term partnership between people and place. The height of that partnership was between 500 and 1500 AD. That was the era of the hidden metropolis, but you have to forget what a city usually looks like. This wasn't one dense urban core like Rome. It was something different, a polycentric civilization, a network of many centers. Think of a constellation. Individual stars, the ceremonial geoglyphs, the ring-ditch villages, the fortified hubs, each with their own light. But connected by those long causeways, the river highways, a shared worldview, they formed one coherent constellation. Across the forest, this was a civilization built for the rainforest's logic. It didn't conquer the ecology. It conversed with it. It used earth and water and fire not to clear the forest, but to cultivate a more productive version. More biodiverse, the metropolis was the forest was the metropolis, one integrated system. Then came a transition. Climatic shifts, social pressures, they led to a great abandonment. Populations declined, the network frayed, and as people left the garden cities and the centers, the forest grew back. But this regrowth wasn't a return to primal nature. It was a second growth, a managed garden going wild but still holding the memory of its caretakers, in the Brazil nut groves, in the patches of dark earth. When European explorers arrived in the 16th and 17th centuries, they walked into this regrown world. They saw the huge trees, the dense canopy, and they called it a virgin wilderness. That was a profound mistake. They weren't seeing untouched nature. They were seeing a post-urban landscape, a garden that had lost its gardeners. This synthesis changes everything. It turns the Amazon from a passive backdrop into an active participant in the human story. For over 1,000 years, this was the stage for a great, quiet experiment. In building large-scale societies within the ecological limits of their world, they succeeded, not for a few generations but for centuries. Their legacy isn't in stone ruins. It's in the very composition of the forest we're trying to save now. The hidden metropolis challenges our basic assumptions about civilization, about wilderness, about what it means to leave a mark. Its greatest lesson might be that the most enduring monuments don't tower against nature. They grow humbly from within it. We have the map now, the broad outline, the shape of the cities, the logic of the gardens, but the details are still in shadow, the texture of their lives. How they governed, how they spoke, how it all finally changed, those are still profound mysteries. The breakthroughs haven't closed the book, they've given us a clearer index. They show us all the chapters we haven't read yet. Take governance. We see immense cooperation, regional planning, but what did that look like day to day? Councils of elders from different ring villages meeting at the geometric plazas, individuals who rose to prominence as master engineers, spiritual leaders. Authority earned through skill, not birth. The absence of palaces suggests one model, but the precise social mechanics, the rules for 1,000,000 people, are written in a language we're still learning to translate. Then language, how did ideas flow along those causeways? The sheer scale implies a mosaic of dialects, maybe distinct languages. Did a trade language emerge? A lingua franca, so someone from the Upano Valley could talk to a trader from the Danos de Mojos. The spread of ceramic styles gives us one clue, but the movement of words is a ghost in the record. A whisper we can't hear yet, and the abandonment, that slow fading, that's the most haunting question. We see broad patterns, climate shifts, social strain. But why did this specific garden city empty out a century before that one? Why did some communities retreat into smaller, fortified settlements while others just vanished? The story isn't one single event. It's 1,000 local endings, each with its own cause, its own final day when the last family packed a canoe and moved on, not knowing they'd never return. This is where the next discovery lies. The tools are getting precise. Scientists are looking to ancient DNA, extracted from resting places, to trace family lineages, migration routes across the continent. That could show us how people moved, who married whom, the kinship networks that bound the metropolis together. Soil chemistry is another frontier, mapping the microscopic signatures of Terra Preta with new sensitivity. To chart the full, staggering extent of this engineered landscape, to show us farmlands we can't even see from the air, advanced dating techniques like optically stimulated luminescence, telling us when a grain of sand was last exposed to sunlight, building a precise timeline, sequencing events almost year by year. Did a canal silt up before or after a major drought? Did construction on a geoglyph stop suddenly? That chronological clarity turns a vague decline into a specific story of challenge and response, and the physical search is far from over. Vast stretches of the Amazon remain terra incognita. The western reaches, the Guiana Shield, never surveyed with LIDAR. The possibility exists that even larger, more complex urban networks are waiting beneath that canopy, ready to redefine our understanding once more. Every new technology promises fresh revelations, ground-penetrating radar that can peer beneath the forest floor, artificial intelligence that can scan satellite imagery for patterns invisible to the human eye. This is the cycle. Each answered question uncovers 3 new ones. The hidden metropolis isn't a puzzle we'll solve and put away. It's a living inquiry, a conversation across centuries. It will captivate explorers, scientists, storytellers for generations. We're standing at the very beginning, a handful of pieces in our hands, only now starting to sense the picture they're meant to form. For a long time, civilization had a checklist. Writing was on it, monumental architecture made of stone, centralized states with kings and emperors, pyramids, palaces. That was the model, and that model came from a few places: Mesopotamia, Egypt, Rome, China. It was a powerful story, but it was a narrow one. It put certain societies right at the center of the human story, and it pushed others to the edges. Or it left them out completely. So the discovery of this Amazonian metropolis, it doesn't just add another location. It challenges the person who drew the map. It asks a question: what if our definition of civilization has been too small? The criteria we used, they weren't neutral. They came from old world biases. They came from histories written by societies that built in stone and wrote things down in ink. When European scholars started categorizing the world, they looked for what they knew. And in the Amazon, they didn't find it. No written records, no temples of quarried granite, no evidence of a single, all-powerful ruler. So by their own checklist, they saw no civilization. They just saw forest. This was more than an oversight. It was a failure of imagination. It meant a society of millions, a society that organized across a continent, that engineered its soil, mastered its water, built a sacred geography out of earth. That society was invisible. It didn't fit the template, so it wasn't counted, but the Amazonians weren't failing to build a civilization. They were building a different kind, one that reached staggering complexity and scale through a completely different set of materials. Their monument wasn't a pyramid of stone, it was a living landscape. Their archive wasn't a library of clay tablets. It was the genetic memory of the forest itself, in the Brazil nut groves in the dark earth. Their power structure wasn't a centralized throne. It was a resilient, distributed network of communities, linked by shared ritual and mutual obligation. They didn't conquer their environment, they conversed with it. Sustainability for them wasn't an afterthought. It was the foundation, and it lasted for over 1,000 years. This forces a global reconsideration. It expands what we think is possible for human societies. Think of the anthropologist David Graeber, writing about social possibilities beyond the rigid state. The Amazonian metropolis is a monumental example of that. It shows that large-scale, sophisticated order doesn't require top-down coercion. It doesn't require monumental egotism in stone or separating culture from nature. It can emerge from cooperation, from ecological intimacy, from a worldview that sees the human community as part of a wider community of living things. This isn't just an Amazonian story, it's a human story. It belongs to all of us because it proves there have always been multiple paths. The path of the ziggurat and the pharaoh is one. The path of the garden city and the earthworks is another. Both represent profound human ingenuity, but for a very long time we only told one of those stories. We enshrined it as the only story. Recognizing the other path does more than correct the record. It opens a door in our imagination. It shows that the way we organize our world today, with its stark divisions between city and country, between economy and ecology, that's not the only way. It's a choice, one path among many that were once walked. So the silent, overgrown ruins in the Amazon, they're more than an archaeological wonder. They're a repository of lost knowledge. Not just about how to build with Earth, but about how to build a society that lasts. Their model of decentralized, ecological integration holds a quiet relevance. In an age facing climate and sustainability crises, their success whispers a question. What can we learn from a civilization that measured its wealth not in gold, but in the fertility of its soil and the abundance of its forest? Their legacy challenges us to broaden our definition of progress, to look for sophistication not just in what we build against nature, but in what we can build in harmony with it. This hidden metropolis, once lost, now asks us to rethink the past and the very foundations of our future. The straight lines weren't just paths, they were statements. A statement of order placed across this whole watery landscape. You look at the spatial analysis, especially in the Danos de Mojos, and something precise comes out of the chaos. These earthen roads, some running over 50 kilometers, they don't follow the terrain, they cut straight through, and that required more than just deciding where a road should go. It required a shared vision, one that was etched into the earth over generations. Umberto Lombardo and his team, they mapped these alignments, they found patterns. Patterns that defy coincidence. Many of the causeways point directly to where the sun sits on the horizon during the solstices, the equinoxes. Others form perfect straight lines connecting distant ceremonial centers. Sometimes with multiple sites lining up like beads on a string. That's advanced surveying. It means a deep knowledge of astronomy, of geometry, of how to project a line across vast distances. You have to imagine the process, a team of surveyors centuries ago standing at one mound, using sighting poles, maybe observations of the stars to determine a direction. Then communicating that line across kilometers of savanna through teams of laborers moving earth. The result is a feature so straight it looks drawn with a ruler. And that precision, it changes how we see their intent. These weren't just pragmatic trails from point A to point B. They were sacred pathways. By aligning a causeway with the solstice sun, they were tying the movement of their people to the movement of the cosmos. To walk that road at dawn on the longest day of the year was to participate in a celestial event. It was a ritual journey built right into the infrastructure of daily life. So the causeway did double duty. Practically, it moved goods and people above the floods. Spiritually, it connected communities to a common cosmic clock and to each other. That integration, the sacred and the practical, it's a hallmark of sophisticated planning. It shows a society that didn't separate how they lived from what they believed. Their entire landscape was a physical expression of their cosmology. These alignments, they acted like tendons. They were the connective tissue binding the dispersed body of the metropolis. A person living in a ring-ditch village 50 kilometers from a major ceremonial center was still connected to it, not just by trade or kinship, but by sight. They could look down that impossibly straight avenue and physically see, their connection to the wider community. It created a sense of place, of belonging on a continental scale. This level of intentional design, it was previously unimagined. We thought of ancient Amazonians as adapting to their environment. This shows they were also orchestrating it. They were composing with earth and sky, writing their beliefs into the very lines of the land. And if the roads were this deliberately planned, it makes you wonder. What other layers of meaning are we still missing, hidden in the geometry of their world? The idea of an empty jungle is gone. Now we see a lost metropolis. A civilization that lasted centuries, supporting millions of people. It was a quiet kind of genius, built on adaptation and grit. We saw the clues, the geometric geoglyphs in Acre, the sprawling platform cities in the Upano Valley. Then there was the self-renewing magic of the Terra Preta soils and the vast, straight causeways. They stitched a continent together. The evidence isn't just scattered curiosities anymore. It's an overwhelming picture. All the pieces connect. The pre-Columbian Amazon was a cradle of sophisticated society. Large-scale society, it was a different kind of civilization. They didn't master their world by conquering it. They mastered it by conversing with it. This story does more than fill a blank spot on a map. It rewrites the history books. It humbles our assumptions, our long-held ideas about what's possible for people in tropical environments. For too long, we measured civilization by a narrow checklist: stone monuments, written records, centralized kings. The Amazonians passed a different test. They passed it with flying colors. They built monuments of earth, monuments of living forest. They kept records in the genetic memory of the trees they tended. Their power came from cooperation, from shared ritual, not from top-down rule. Their legacy shows that great civilizations can leave footprints of earth, not just stone. And it shows that what we call wilderness is often a memory, a profound memory of human presence and care. Now, as we face our own ecological challenges, these lessons ring with a new clarity. Their model of sustainability wasn't an abstract ideal. It was a practical, lived reality. It fed millions for 1,000 years. Their deep adaptation, engineering the soil, managing water, designing cities that worked with the forest's rhythms, it stands as a testament to human ingenuity. It shows that a thriving future doesn't force us to choose between people and the planet. It asks us to remember how to be gardeners on a grand scale.